Hello everyone. So I'm the UI designer at Zabbix. I started last year to work on the new UI design for our upcoming version. So probably some of you have already seen our alpha versions, so our efforts in order to change the design. Now I realize that it might be a really painful topic for some of you guys, especially who are using the front end on a daily basis. And now the good news is that we are now really dedicated to make changes. We realize that it probably doesn't look so great in terms of how it looks visually and in terms of user experience as well. And maybe not so good news is that change is always hard and it takes a lot of effort to, especially if you have such a long legacy. So what you see maybe, so the visual layer, but it's only the smallest part of the whole UI. So what you see on the surface also takes a lot of effort to rewrite the code. So in the future we can make more significant changes, not only in terms of how it looks visually, but also how it actually works when you interact with it. So I will start with the present. So what are our current efforts? So in order to be able to make those really significant changes, to make the new UI look more modern and more user-friendly, easier to use, there is some stuff we need to do first. Well, not only how we design the stuff, but both how we actually work internally on this stuff as a team. So maybe previously how it was done, well, we sort of figure out the technology and then we'll sort of figure out the user experience. Which probably may not be such a good approach. But we are really dedicated to change this approach, how we deal with this stuff. So our main focus was basically to rewrite some parts of the front end to make it easier to implement more significant changes in the future. And along the way, we try to remove all the visual clutter, so to make the UI look more easier to use, so not so much cluttered with unnecessary stuff. And another thing is that we want to avoid this kind of situation when we suddenly roll out the new version and the whole UI looks completely different, and then you have to basically learn how to use it from scratch. So what you will see probably more incremental changes in the upcoming versions. So what's new? Let's start with color themes. Right now we have 2 color themes out of the box. So that's the blue theme, or the light theme, and the dark one. So I guess previously we had more color themes, but now we have only 2. And what's good about that probably instead of making the whole bunch of different color themes, we try to really focus on 2 versions and to really focus to make it so it just looks really great, instead of producing a whole bunch of different themes. And as usual, you can change the colors as you want. So basically you can now, as we are rewriting the code as well, so now we have HTML5, CSS3, and we're using CSS preprocessor, so SAS, to generate the CSS code. And I guess, well, if you talk about the color themes, now it's much easier to change colors. We have separate SAS files where you can find all the color variables in there. So you can just easily change the hex code for the colors, and basically that's it. So in my opinion, it's much more convenient now. Another thing is we really try to focus on improving the readability in this version. So let me give you an example. So these are the tables in the current version of Zabbix frontend. So as you probably would imagine, there's a lot of stuff that we can easily remove, get rid of, and improve the readability. And that's the version how it looks like in version 3.0, so in the alpha version that you have probably seen already, at least some of you. Now I've heard some sort of complaints and ideas and suggestions that for some people like it, some don't like it so much. And the good news is that we are really trying to listen to all your feedback, and it's definitely not like the final version of the design. So we will be collecting all your feedback, and of course, if there are some really great ideas, or if really understand that some parts of the new design are maybe not so successful, then we'll definitely we'll be changing some stuff during some next releases. Another thing is we try to make not only increase the readability, but make the whole design much cleaner and easier sort of to see the information in the front end. Well, another example of how the navigation looks like in the new version of the same navigation. So the main difference here is, as you can see, that we're now using less colors, more icons and such stuff, and it really now looks more simple and much cleaner. And you can see the same things across the whole UI. Next big change. So previously, all the graphics was done in PNG images or in GIFs, or sort of, and now we're moving to SVG and CSS. So now all the graphics is scalable across various screen sizes, across various resolutions. So now all the icons, for example, that you can see in the front end look really sharp, even on high-res displays. So and another benefit of this that here you go, the example. And another benefit of this is that we could dramatically reduce the number of images that we are now using. So that's the current state that we have here, and probably, I guess, these are not all image files in here, and that's what we're having now, basically. We're using the SVG sprites, so you don't have to make a huge amount of HTTP requests just to load the images, for example. So that's a really useful change as well. So now we're having new color themes, cleaner design, improved readability, and scalable graphics. And now maybe let me talk a little bit about our future plans. So as we are doing all this stuff, as I already told you, well, it takes a lot of effort to rewrite the code and to really change not only how it looks like, but the whole user experience. So, and our main focus in the future definitely will be the user experience, so how you guys will interact with the interface. So yes, we know that there are really big problems. Some things are not so easy to use, complicated. For example, you have to click many times to choose something, and that's just a little part of it. And we'll definitely focus on that. Another thing, data visualization. Well, we already heard that some of you are using some third-party plugins like Grafana or something to visualize all your data. And we are definitely thinking about that, how we can not only present the data on your dashboard as textual values, but also how we can visualize all this stuff in a really beautiful way, so you can present it beautifully. And I already know that we are playing with some of this stuff, actually. So yeah, you should definitely wait and see what we will deliver there. And another big thing, responsive design. So which of course is not so easy in the current state of our front end, but it's definitely will be a huge improvement in the future. So yeah, that was briefly the update on the current state of design, what our main focus is and right now, and what our plans for the nearest future. And what I wanted to say, that actually, well, from the outside it looks very easy. So I've heard some comments that, well, what the hell, these guys, they're just changing the visual stuff, they just change the colors and that's it. So it's easy, so everyone can do that. But in order to do that, as I mentioned, yeah, we have to change a lot of things, not only on the visual layer, but actually there are some significant changes under the hood. So yeah, and I know that a lot of guys who are working on the front end, they really work really hard to make it happen. So Sasha, Oleg, Ivo, so really putting much effort into this. Yeah, so maybe we can just give them a little bit round of applause. Yeah, well, that's it from my side. I know that Rich will follow up with more technical details, and I guess afterwards we'll have some Q&A, a little Q&A session. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Pavel's already explained a bit about the new design, about the reasonings behind doing it, and where are we going. So yeah, this will be about Zabbix 3.0, what's coming, what's great, and what's just nice. Before we start with the nice things, I'd like to say a very personal story about what happened with this. Who knows what that is? 1, 2, 3, 4, that few? Who voted last year? A few, so yeah. The first place, the winner of the feature voting last year was something that many were expecting a lot, but after evaluation by developers and after trying to figure out how to implement something like that, unfortunately we figured out that we don't really know how to do that so that the feature would be useful. That's either very complicated or there's some trick that we still have to figure out. So it's not that we just decided to not implement it. And I'm pretty sure that the developers will think about that in the background, and if they ever come up with a way to do that in a reasonable way, they will absolutely do that. And in a way, it's probably better to be open and honest about this instead of developing something and pretending that it's what you all were voting for. So that's the slightly sad part, but instead of that, we developed something else for 3.0. So, and these colored things, these types of connections, who has had them stuck in one state? A few, yeah, a few dozen. So that was pretty common. If you, for example, started monitoring a host in a passive mode and switched all the items to the active, that Z stayed in green or red state pretty much forever. I know that quite a lot of people actually have custom scripts to deal with this. there are people who are saying that their users are complaining quite a bit about that. And for 3.0, the plan is to make all that happen automatically. If you switch all your items from passive to active, that thing should go back to gray. The same with pretty much all of the types, not just for the Zabbix agent. So that should simplify the maintenance a bit and maybe for somebody eliminate the need for a custom script. So overall through this presentation, I would not mention individual developers for each feature because there's too many of them, and I don't remember for every single feature who did that. But in the end, I think we can all say huge thanks to the developers. But for now, let's enjoy what they have developed. And all the other things I've tried to categorize in a way. I like to put things in boxes. So I had 6 very rough sections here, sort of like cleanup of what we had before, Zabbix maintenance in general, collecting and processing data, so item trigger improvements, the front end usability in a very vague sense, anything that might make Zabbix easier to use. Low-level discovery got a special separate category because we actually improved a lot of things for LLD in 3.0. I was slightly surprised when I was looking through all the improvements that we had. I had already forgotten about some of those. And in the end, for the end, I've kept a few that we already know about some of the improvements, but which I personally consider to be the most important ones. Cleanup phase. Cleanup, this is something I would personally say that we developed something earlier, and then we probably missed some aspect of something, some way to do things, which was making the feature a bit less useful, and now they are more useful. One I personally found to be very nice is actually monitoring DNS over TCP instead of just UDP as it was before. And DNS servers must be available over TCP, so I would probably suggest once you have upgraded to 3.0 to start monitoring them and see whether TCP side actually works as expected. So that's a bit of an API snippet. Anybody got an idea about what that is? Any API users who have suffered from this missing? It's a puzzle, yeah, 1, 2, we're getting somewhere 3. I see like ding ding going, like, oh, that thing. So in the API, when you were querying user group information, previously the permission information was not returned. So if you wanted to, let's say, synchronize user groups from one Zabbix instance to another, there's a patch in Jira and so on, but now that will be natively built in, supported, documented, and just perfectly working. Another puzzle. What is this about? Yeah, we have a few people. So what is it? For the trigger prototypes, dependencies for the trigger prototypes. That's something which was preventing people from, let's say, if you had in the low-level discovery rule, you had 2 trigger prototypes. One for the disk space, use disk space above 75%, one for 90, and you want to have dependency from one on another so that only one of them would be active at a time. You couldn't do that with LLD. You could do that with manually created triggers. Now, with dependencies, so maybe it's not that well readable, but there's a new tab in the trigger prototype configuration called dependencies, and you may configure them. They will be propagated to the created triggers on the host level. That was voted in the 2nd place last year in the conference, and so that was kind of not planned to be implemented. Developers actually decided to implement it because it makes life easier, so there you go. One thing which is slightly more under the hood is improving how we handle the XML files, the ones that you can use for importing, exporting templates, hosts, maps, screens, and so on. And previously, the XML version up there was 1.0 for pretty much all of the Zabbix versions, which made it a bit harder for developers themselves to actually figure out what to do with that XML file. Which version is it from? How do we actually interpret the information in there? So we will be doing the version number, a more proper one from now on, and actually what took way more time than just changing the version number, the XML import has been significantly improved. So all the supported formats, we should handle them better, and also for some of the older formats we have implemented some more conversions, so things which were failing to import previously, they might import now. So if you find some nice but old template, there's a bigger chance that it will work properly. One thing which was kind of, we missed it, is IPv6 support for Java Gateway. So we were having IPv6 support everywhere except in the Java Gateway. So probably not many people will use that right now, but still now we can, with full honesty, say it's supported everywhere. And given that IPv6 is approaching, well, it's been doing that for what, 10 years, 20, I don't know, like, well, a bit. I've forgotten even when it started. But with all the local registries running out of the IP addresses, I think North America ran out like in July this year or something like that, or June. So I would expect that the usage will continue increasing. So I'm not committing myself to saying that it will increase, right? In general, the Zabbix frontend has been cleaned up under the hood. As Pavel said, we didn't just change 3 colors. Actually, there's a lot of changes. It's been changed so much, if you would look at the diff, you would probably go, oh, I'm not reading that. So there's a bit more work on making it fit better the MVC. We'll be doing more post for the change instead of the GET requests, less SID passing in the URL, so some security-related improvements as well. And if anybody is interested, there's an issue about this where you can follow this development, but there's a lot. I find that one personally a bit hard to follow even. Inventory. Who has been using something like LLD or network discovery for hosts and wanting to use inventory on those hosts? Some people have been wanting that a lot. Right. So previously what happened is that inventory was completely disabled for new hosts. So again, what did people do? They wrote some gnomes or things like that, and then they automatically, after using the scripts through the API, they automatically kind of set the inventory mode. Now you can choose the default inventory mode, which I would expect that all those people would just set to automatic right away. And even better, in the action operations, you can now change inventory mode as well. So this should make life easier for you a lot. Another category, and I'll probably be having trouble with time, so I'll try to speak a bit faster, is the things which might make it easier to maintain your Zabbix installation. This one will have actually very little content. One is that there's a local directory. As mentioned by Alexei in his talk already, it's not guaranteed to work for everything everywhere perfectly, but that's the direction that we are taking to make it a bit easier for you to make some slight modifications here, or including some add-ins in the front end. So they would survive the upgrades a bit better. It's not finished. You could take that as a proof of concept in 3.0. Another is ability to manually invoke the Zabbix housekeeper, which currently is only invocable by starting Zabbix server. And those who have missed, in older versions of Zabbix housekeeper started right away when you started the server daemon. Now it takes half an hour, and I see that some of you have noticed that. So now, if you would like to activate the housekeeper right away, there's a real-time command to do that. When I said that there's little content in this section, that doesn't mean that it's bad, actually, because a lot of such maintenance stuff went to 2.4. So if you haven't used 2.4 yet, I hope you will be pleasantly surprised by the improvements there. But let's continue with 3.0. Collecting data, processing data, so other item and trigger-related things. Procmem item, if you have been using that to monitor memory, you might have had a desire to monitor some other memory type. On Linux, whether it's the VM size, VM RSS, VM data, on other platforms where that's supported, you could use different keywords. And this might be most obvious if you have monitored Zabbix server, Zabbix agent, or Zabbix proxy memory usage. You might have discovered that by currently procmem on the process name, that's not a useful result. It just gives you hugely inflated value for all the shared resources. If you're interested in the specific memory types that are supported in the platform, check the Zabbix manual. It's actually very nicely documented. Log file monitoring has been improved. The performance has been improved, and it's been made more reliable in case of files changing, timestamps changing. Similar as with the encryption, obviously, if you want to benefit from this feature, you would also have to upgrade the agents which you would like to use for log monitoring. CPU utilization monitoring. Now that is available per process, and you can actually filter by lots of different things. For Solaris users out there, you can filter by zone, and yeah, test it. Let us know whether the results match reality. Our testing says that it could be useful. The item polling or the data gathering, currently you can use so-called flexible intervals and tell Zabbix that from this hour collect it every minute, from this hour do that every 5 minutes, and so on. And Read.io, you will be able to specify very specific rules on how the items should be polled. Pretty much like saying, do that on Monday at 9 o'clock, or do that every 5 minutes, from this to that. We didn't reuse cron-tab syntax here, so that's a custom way to do these specifications. It's documented again, so if you'd like to take a look at how this will be possible in Read.io, then just check the Zabbix manual. Who knows where this is, in the Zabbix interface, where this is from? Graphs. Anybody using that in the graphs? A few. Anybody wanted to use that somewhere else? Let's say in triggers or in calculated items? So that's coming. Yeah, more people appear once they hear that it's coming, so that's good. So this is pretty cool because you can now not just alert on percentile, you can also log historically what it was. So before that, you could only see on a graph a straight line for the data that was being graphed. This is a thing I would expect people in the, let's say, ISP business to use a bit more, but probably others as well. Front-end usability, a very generic category, but still, you already saw things about the new design. So let's look at the other things. Top 101 triggers. Who remembers what the filter there is currently? It's very limited. It's like last day, last week, something like that. In Read.io, it got a whole bunch of new things. That screenshot is not readable. So that's why I put up the text up there. You can filter by host group, by trigger severity, and by specific time period from here to there, which should allow to identify, let's say, flapping triggers in a specific host group, or even actually use that to identify which hosts are, let's say, less stable. So not just for general Zabbix maintenance, which was what people would use that before because it was not easy to use for anything else. Filtering by host group alone is a big improvement, actually. Zabbix dashboard filter got improved as well, and again, as it's not very readable, I will not ask you to identify the new feature in there, but you can filter by trigger name in the Zabbix dashboard. Additionally, in the dashboard, we will be displaying the trigger description, probably in the pop-up for all the triggers in the last 20 issues widget. This one, as far as I recall, has not been developed yet, so don't look for that in trunk. Right, user macros or user variables. Using those and trying to figure out what the value is on a host. If the host is linked to a whole bunch of templates, that's very painful. It's not impossible, but you have to look around in lots of different places to figure out what the resolving value will be. So in Read.io, in the macros tab in host and template properties, we will have a separate view called inherited and host macros. Once you switch to that view, you will see that, okay, this macro is defined on the host only. This macro is coming from this template, and you can click on the template name and edit the template details right away. Or you can see that this macro is coming from a global configuration, and then see which level it gets overridden. So I've seen so many mistakes being done, whether by misconfiguring SNMP community somewhere because it was overridden somewhere in nested templates, or some threshold being wrong, so hopefully this will save a lot of time. And in the header, there's like a blue small text in this screenshot. What does it say? Configure. That leads to the global macro configuration, so it's actually very easy to navigate and see where the values come from and maybe even modify them right away. Event acknowledging, that has been improved as well, and you can now choose whether you want to acknowledge only the selected events or the selected and all the unacknowledged or all the unacknowledged problem events. Previously it was like if these are acknowledged, don't add the message, and so it was not very transparent, it was not easy to explain. The acknowledge button now always takes you back, so you don't have to choose acknowledge, return, what? So that should be a bit easier to use now. And way easier to explain how it works, actually. users of Zabbix interface, they tend to be technical. They would like to actually use the data sometimes themselves. And one thing which there's no specification yet, so we don't know actually how exactly it will work, but we expect to implement ability for normal users, not admin users, to create network maps, screens, slideshows, and even share them with other users. So once we start working on the specification and initial implementation, any help with testing would be really great as well. Some smaller things, in the trigger URL you can use a whole bunch of extra additional macros or variables, host IP, host name, host con, and so on. Also user macros. Alert script parameters currently are hard-coded. We have passed 3 positional parameters, the 2 for the user, and then the subject and message from the action properties. You'll be able to override these, you'll be able to change that. The use case for this would be reusing a script which accepts parameters in a different order, or maybe ignores the first parameter or something like that. Currently, you must have a wrapper script to use such a script. In 3.0, you should be able to use it directly, and possibly even in the future, pass extra information to the alert script. That's currently not implemented, so don't really remind me about that if it's not happening. Possibly, again, we have no idea what exactly, but we might introduce some initial attempts at some basic password policy, like let's say disallowing empty passwords, which users currently can set. And on the front-end side, we actually have reduced the amount of translatable strings and made them more uniform and cleaned them up quite a bit. So if you are translating Zabbix frontend, then life should be a bit easier for you. And if you are translating Zabbix frontend, then huge thank you. Those who are translating, you know that I know who you are, so well, good job. LLD-related improvements. SNMP, LLD, who's using LLD with SNMP? That's almost like 1/3 of the people here. And currently, for an SNMP table, you can discover only a single thing. And I know that there are a bunch of different scripts floating around that actually allow you to discover multiple OIDs in one pass. In Zabbix 3.0, this will become a native feature. You choose from which tables to pull out the values, to what macros or variables to actually map them. And as an example, you could discover in one run the if descriptor and if alias for all the network interfaces. No need to have some scripts for this. Native, built in. And obviously, well, maybe not that obviously, but still, when you are upgrading, all the syntax is converted to the new format, so you don't have to actually do anything to make your old ones work in the new model. Any Windows users here? A few, and they admit it. And so yeah, I know that Windows monitoring actually is quite important, and in Zabbix 3.0, you will be able to discover Windows services. Currently, again, there's a bunch of scripts. We have a blog article on the Zabbix blog about this, and now that will be built in. Macro usage, you could use for the low-level discovery, that is, you can now use them in units. You can use them in IPMI sensor field, and the one I kept as the last one, you can also use them in the applications, which actually means that, putting things the other way, you can now LLD discover applications as well to be assigned to items. For example, maybe putting all the items for a single interface in a single application. Syntax, something like that. If that doesn't make sense to you, ask me about that later. I'll try to explain it a bit better. Databases, Zabbix has a built-in ODBC monitoring, and 3.0 brings the ODBC LLD discovery. So what you do, borrowing from the Zabbix manual, you pass something like this into the ODBC item or ODBC LLD rule, and you end up with these being automatically consumed by Zabbix LLD. So you could discover things outside of some database without scripts. With scripts, people were doing that before. Now built in with LLD. Anybody who has wanted to have different threshold for different file systems? Oh yeah, that's a lot of both arms being thrown up, which is hopefully not giving up. So yeah, what did you do before? Probably have a custom LLD rule maybe, or just gave up or something like that. In 3.0, there's a great feature called macro context, which I personally have found very hard to explain, so I'm tuning that explanation every now and then. But basically, for each macro or variable, you specify the context, which, and there's actually a bug. Probably we should use there, in this case, the hash mark. So yeah, these slides are not finished. I'm very sorry about that. I'm putting the final. I was putting the final touches minutes ago, but yeah, you would use in the LLD rule. You would specify instead of the. See, I cannot explain it that well. Okay, so I still have to practice. But the basic idea would be that if the macro does not resolve to the expanded value with the context, we fall back to the default, which is without the context. And I should really work on that explanation some more. Big stuff. So things which I consider big. There is one which I think we killed or removed. And I will not even say what that is, but this is how things are now. So it's now buttons. Every time when I use that thing instead of that previous thing, I say yeah. At least either out loud or internally. Every single time so far. I don't know how long time it will take, but that's so awesome. If you don't know what that is, find it out. You can search for Zabbix and death, and maybe that brings some results up on Google. Anyway, encryption, obviously that's a big thing, but we talked about that yesterday. So I'm skipping that. Trend prediction in Zabbix. This is being implemented as a trigger function, and one of those is a forecast function, which essentially will allow you to have a trigger which will alert you if in a time that you specify in the trigger, the value will reach some threshold. And one I personally would probably find a bit easier to use is called time left. And in this case, if you specify the threshold, then how much time is still left for to reach that threshold. There's lots of fancy math underneath that I understand, like, I don't know, maybe this. So developers are very helpfully discussing that they should prepare some examples so users would understand how to actually use this, and well, so I could understand how it works. And just some uncategorized features. Anybody who has tried to use Zabbix email notifications with SNMP, where you would need authentication, where you need encryption, a few. What do you do? Custom script, what else? Yeah, local relaying SMTP servers. So basically we had a couple of solutions. Send email is probably what most people use. It's a Perl script which can do lots of things with email. In 3.0, you're getting built-in encryption things. Behind the scenes, we are using curl for this, so no new dependencies for the Zabbix server. This one has not been developed yet, but it's kind of planned. Anybody who has seen that message, and when does that come up? And what memories does that bring up? Importing a template and seeing that message. How much pain is that? Well, it depends. If that value map has 2 entries, you could just go in and create it manually. If it has 100 entries, I wouldn't do that manually, but I've seen people who have done that manually. That is the value mapping, which will be supported for XML import export in 3.0. So templates now should be more self-contained instead of, okay, now add manually these value map entries or add or run this SQL thing. So now that should be a bit easier. Well, it's not developed yet, so let's wait for that. And I'm probably so way over time that I'm just saying that do check out the What's New page in the Zabbix manual. As a minimum, do check out the upgrade notes, but I would strongly suggest the What's New page because you will learn about the new features and you'll be able to use them more efficiently. We don't have, at least I haven't seen our documentation guy here today, but so thanks to him for maintaining that page and updating it, and thanks to all the developers who are participating in the documentation. That helps a lot, users, and hopefully our team as well. If you have any feedback about the features, if you have any questions about like, okay, I think I found a regression, at this stage it's probably best to ask on IRC because we have had quite a few cases where people are reporting regressions that are actually, no, that's a new feature, just do use it differently. So come on IRC, ask questions, and then see what other people are discussing. Remember yesterday I said that we could call this Developer Appreciation Weekend. So I think this is a good time that we could ask actually all these Zabbix developers to stand up and kind of say huge thanks to them. So Zabbix developers, even the shy ones, just up you go. If I see any Zabbix developers sitting down. So these guys are actually making all that happen. Okay, and thank you for your patience. I'm kind of done. Any questions? If you have any questions to Pavel about new design, and he's more than happy to answer those. Yeah, sorry.
Will you upgrade maps mechanism? Copy paste and design maps and maps elements?
We are slightly improving the editing interface, but we don't have for 3.0 any specific improvements regarding the editing of network maps.
For us, the maps mechanism is very actual because we use it to our duty admins, to our resource service model, and we have many trouble with current mechanism.
We have discussed several improvements how to make the map configuration easier, but for 3.0, with all the things, it's not something we could afford to include at this time. But noted, and we'll put that on in the wish list. Okay. What else?
Hey, yeah. You talked about improvements in the front end and usability and stuff. Can we, in triggers, when viewing triggers, select the fields we want to see, the columns?
Selectable columns in the Zabbix interface, that's probably not interesting only for triggers, but actually for lots of different pages. I would expect that people who are using inventory would really love that feature as well, because there's a lot of potential columns. That would be something that would have to be developed not just for a single page, but as a general model for all the pages. So that would be somewhat significant effort. Yeah, the same as with the network map improvements regarding the editing of them, currently nothing on the roadmap.
Okay.
But one thing I would actually hope for is that with the redesign front-end basics now with the foundations, hopefully that will be a tiny bit easier, so maybe more likely to happen, but absolutely no promises.
Also performance-wise too, because when you have a ton of triggers alerting, you can't really, sometimes it takes too long because the front-end makes a lot of calls asking for command scripts and stuff for each trigger, so it would be faster too, maybe.
If implemented properly, definitely, yes.
Yeah.
So would be good.
Another thing, you talked about acknowledge, which I couldn't really see from back here. Can we remove X now? I don't know, someone made a mistake and...
No, that has not been changed. Acknowledges are permanent, at least. Well, if you go in database, you can do lots of things, but you cannot delete acknowledgements still. So that's... If you did it, it's still there. But yeah, again, noted, so
okay,
we'll consider that.
Will the user be able to save top 100 filter for later usage, or will it be as like with the bar report?
If I recall correctly, that the filter settings should be retained or remembered from one session, from one access to another, but there is no feature to have like multiple entries. That's slightly less of a concern than with the bar reports, which are actually, I didn't mention that, but they're being removed for 3.0. Because in the bar reports you could have lots of configuration and quite a lot of complex configuration, so saving that was very desirable. In the trigger top 100 there's a bit less of the filter settings.
Okay, but it's still very boring to do the same actions again and again.
Yeah, as I mentioned, if I recall correctly, they should be preserved from one opening of that page to another. Although I haven't tried that in the current trunk implementation. So if you're always using the same settings, I would expect that it should just, well, work.
Okay.
Sure.
Two things. The first thing, when I go and create a new template and I create new items and new triggers, and each and every time I go to select the item for the trigger, it defaults to the all group upstairs, and I need to go and find back my template group, and then I have to go and find my template again to select the trigger, the item to put in the trigger. Is that
Not good usability, is it?
As I said, yeah, there's a lot of things that we can improve, and well, probably I can't promise you that we'll fix specifically your problem, but during the time, yeah, definitely you will see a lot of improvements in terms of usability.
Right. And second question was to know if the Zabbix API moved from the PHP frontend to the Zabbix server. Is that scheduled for Zabbix 3.0 or?
It was, we had planned to have an initial implementation, sort of a proof of concept again, but we slightly got scared of doing that for the LTS release, so that will have to wait for 3.2. Right, so Zabbix 3.0 will be a long-term support release, so for things like security fixes supported for 5 years. 2.4 is non-LTS, and we will stop supporting 2.4 a month or so after 3.0 comes out.
Since we're already asking about the roadmap, do you plan on enabling some sort of restrictions for the API, like giving users access to only the certain methods of the API?
That's currently not on the roadmap, and I'm not even sure there's an existing feature request. So if you could start Jira, and if there's nothing like that, then maybe a new feature request would be useful so that we could at least figure out the direction that's desirable there.
Thanks.
But things about like future plans or so on, make sure to note your questions down for the QA session that we have later today as well. Submit them on IRC, Twitter, or whatever. And obviously, once we start the Q&A session later today, then well, ask the questions in person as well. Thank you.